Under the dim fluorescent lights of Manhattan General's most exclusive ICU suite, Eden Carter lay utterly still, her body surrounded by softly humming machines and a relentless silence that masked a storm far more dangerous than the one that had put her there. At first glance, she looked like any other comatose patient, eyes shut, chest rising and falling in mechanical rhythm, a slight paleness in her cheeks. But Eden was anything but unconscious. Behind her closed lids, her mind raced with surgical clarity. Every beep, every whispered conversation at the edge of her room, every fake tear shed by her sister, or the smug assurances from her ex-fiancé, she had heard it all. 15 days ago, Eden had survived a private jet crash that the press called a tragic accident. But Eden knew better. The moment the hydraulic system failed midair, something clicked inside her. That was no malfunction. It was sabotage. And she had a strong suspicion who was behind it. But suspicions weren't enough. Not in her world. Not when the vultures circling her were family. So in a move so bold only someone with nothing left to lose could pull it off, Eden had chosen silence. She'd faked the coma long enough to gather information to observe and to set a trap so perfect it would snap shut before they even realized she was awake. She hadn't counted on Marcus Bell. He entered the room every night at the same hour, clipboard in hand, soft sneakers, barely making a sound on the polished floors. He moved with a quiet confidence, neither overly deferential like some of the other nurses, nor brusquely efficient like the doctors who barely glanced at her chart. Marcus treated Eden like a person, not a case. He adjusted her sheets with care, checked her IV lines like someone tending a friend rather than a stranger, and always whispered a few words when no one was around. At first she thought it was a habit, something he did with all patients. But then came that night, the night his voice broke, and he said something that made her heart, carefully trained for stillness, miss a beat. "I know you can't hear me, but I need to say this," he whispered, smoothing her oxygen line with trembling fingers. "Before I met you, I thought people like you were all the same, cold, calculating, rich enough not to care." He let out a breath that sounded more like a confession. "But you're different. I've seen the donation receipts. You fund schools no one even talks about. You paid for kids in my old neighborhood to get their first chance at college. And when those kids in the Bronx got their tablets, you cried in your sleep." His hand brushed gently over her arm, a touch that felt more like reverence than routine. "You hide it well, but your heart, it's nothing like they say." Eden felt the air thicken around her. She had spent years being the stone-faced CEO, the no-nonsense strategist whose empathy was deliberately invisible. But Marcus saw her, not because of interviews or PR campaigns, but through something pure presence. He thought she couldn't hear. He thought he was speaking into a void, and that made his words the most honest thing she had heard in years. 3 weeks before her sister Vanessa had invited her to a relaxing weekend getaway, her voice laced with concern that now felt bitterly hollow. "You need to rest, Eden. You're pushing too hard," she had said. Eden had felt a flicker of suspicion then, but she had ignored it. Family after all. But now, after overhearing Vanessa plot with Lucas, the man who once slid a $2 million ring onto her finger and promised forever, she knew better. They were planning to transfer her to a private clinic, a place where she would be indefinitely sedated, her power of attorney activated, and her company, her life's work, ripped apart and sold off. The betrayal cut deep, but it wasn't what made her cry behind closed eyelids. It was Marcus. The way his voice cracked when he promised to protect her. The way he adjusted her pillow with those strong, calloused hands, like it was the most sacred duty in the world. The way he said, "The heart doesn't see color or money, it just sees kindness. And I fell in love with that kindness you hide from the world." She didn't know if she could trust him, not yet. But she knew this Marcus Bell was the first person in years who had spoken to her without asking for anything in return. And as she lay perfectly still beneath the pale hospital sheets, Eden Carter, the youngest self-made billionaire in education technology, realized something terrifying and beautiful. At once, the war wasn't just about her company anymore. It was about her heart. And that heart, guarded and bruised as it was, began to stir in ways Eden hadn't allowed for years. For the next few nights, Eden listened more closely, not just to Marcus's footsteps or the quiet shuffle of his charts, but to the way he lingered. His silences were thoughtful, not empty. Sometimes he hummed softly while adjusting her blanket. Other times he'd whisper small stories about his shifts, about patients who recovered and those who didn't. She learned about his mother, a retired school bus driver, who raised him and his little brother alone in Detroit. She learned about the nights he studied on a second-hand laptop powered by the very scholarship program her company had quietly funded, long before she'd become a household name. He never connected the dots. To Marcus Eden, Carter was just another woman in a coma, a patient, a mystery, and yet he spoke to her as though she were something more. He didn't worship her, he respected her. Not for her title, but for the impact she'd unknowingly had on his life. It made her ache in ways she didn't expect. Each night, he gave her pieces of his story, gentle confessions, without expectation. She'd grown so used to people speaking in calculated layers, saying only what would serve them. But Marcus spoke like no one was listening. That made every word hit harder, more honest, more dangerous. Especially to someone like her who had spent the last decade trusting only contracts, not people. She began to anticipate his voice like oxygen. Then came the night that changed everything. Marcus entered the room later than usual. She could hear the fatigue in his steps, the drag in his voice as he checked the monitors. "They want to move you," he whispered almost too quietly. "Your sister's pushing hard for the transfer." I overheard them at the nurse's station. Something about a special clinic, she picked herself. But it doesn't feel right. Not the way they said it. Eden's pulse spiked. She forced her breathing to stay even, but her fingers twitched beneath the blanket. She had suspected the timing Vanessa was running out of patience. They wanted her out of this hospital, away from people like Marcus, away from any chance of truth. But Marcus wasn't finished. "I don't know if I'm crazy," he said, pulling a chair beside her bed, "but I feel like there's something in your eyes, like you're still here somehow. Maybe it's just hope, or maybe it's, God, I don't know." He laughed softly to himself. "I sound like one of those people who fall in love with ghosts." Eden wanted to cry, not from fear or rage, but from how real he was. In a world where she'd learned to weaponize silence, Marcus's vulnerability felt like light slipping into a locked room. That was when she made her decision. She couldn't do this alone. The plan she'd been forming was airtight audio recordings of conversations, financial trails of bribes, even a failsafe built into her company's legal system. But all of it required someone on the inside, someone to help her move to activate the final stages. And she knew without a shadow of doubt that Marcus Bell was the only person in that entire hospital who had seen her, truly seen her, long before she opened her eyes. That night, as he stood to leave, Eden almost broke character. Her lips parted just slightly, but she stopped herself. Timing was everything. So she waited for the moment when his loyalty would meet her truth, when his heart would become her greatest weapon, not because it could hurt anyone, but because it had the power to protect. And by morning, that moment would arrive. The moment came in the quietest hour of the night, when the halls were empty and the world outside the window was nothing but rain-slicked streets and distant sirens. Marcus returned to Eden's room for what was supposed to be a routine check: heart rate, oxygen levels, nothing unusual. But as he leaned over to adjust her IV line, something shifted. A whisper, soft as breath. "Marcus." He froze. The clipboard in his hand slipped and clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd imagined it. He stared at her face, eyes still closed, brow smooth, lips unmoving. But then she spoke again, barely audible, like a breeze through cracked glass. "Marcus, I'm awake." His knees nearly gave out. "Oh my God," he breathed, backing up a step, staring at her with a mix of disbelief and wonder. "You? How long?" 2 weeks, she said, her voice raspy but steady. "I've been listening to everything." Marcus stared at her, at the patient he'd poured his heart out to, the woman he thought he'd never meet outside his dreams. Now she was looking at him, truly looking, and it felt like the ground beneath him had tilted. "I knew something was wrong," he said, stepping closer, voice low. The scans, the responses, none of it made sense. But they insisted. "Dr. Hamilton said he's on Vanessa's payroll." Eden interrupted, her gaze sharp now, no longer that of a silent witness, but of a strategist awakening. "She and Lucas orchestrated the plane crash. They're planning to transfer me tomorrow to a clinic where I'll be permanently sedated, and then they'll take over the company." Marcus ran a hand down his face, shaking his head in disbelief. That's monstrous. But why trust me? Why tell me this? Eden looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softer than they'd been in years. Because you spoke to me like I mattered. Not because of my name, not because of what I own, but because of who you thought I was, even when you thought I'd never respond. That kind of honesty is rare, and I need someone I can trust. His throat tightened. What do you need me to do? A small, knowing smile touched her lips. In the nightstand, there's a phone. Unlocked. Open the folder labeled Artemis. It contains direct lines to my private attorney, my investigative team, and a journalist I've worked with for years. Tell them the Eagle has landed. That's the code. Marcus followed her instructions quietly. As he moved, she outlined the rest of her plan, a security protocol built into her company's legal system that would trigger an internal audit the moment her power of attorney was activated. Secret recordings saved on her tablet, ones that captured Vanessa and Lucas discussing every detail of the betrayal, and a loyal assistant who had been feeding her intel since the day of the crash. All of it's in motion, she said, her voice gaining strength with every word. But without someone here inside this hospital, I'm just a file in a bed. He turned back to her, holding the phone. His jaw clenched. You're not just a file. Not to me. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the air between them thickened with something unspoken but undeniable. I'll help you, Marcus said. Whatever it takes. And with that, the lines between patient and nurse, billionaire and caretaker blurred completely. What remained was simple: a woman fighting to reclaim her life, and a man who had already given her the only thing no one else dared offer, his unwavering belief. By morning, the storm outside had passed, but inside Eden's hospital suite, a different kind of lightning was about to strike. Marcus had moved like a ghost through the halls that night, slipping messages into coded emails, making phone calls in empty supply closets, following every instruction Eden gave him to the letter. He barely slept, but adrenaline carried him. The woman he thought he was losing had been awake the whole time, brilliant, betrayed, and burning with purpose. Now her plan was unfolding, and he was no longer just a bystander. He was part of it. At 9:00 a.m., sharp, a man in a tailored gray suit arrived at the nurse's station, identifying himself as Dr. Marcus Whitfield, a neurological specialist from Harvard sent to assess Eden's condition before the transfer. His ID looked flawless. His tone was crisp, polite. The hospital staff had no reason to question him. They didn't know he was David Chen, Eden's longtime chief of staff. At 10:00, a new nurse clocked in, blending seamlessly into the rotation. Catherine Brooks wore blue scrubs, white sneakers, and a stethoscope she didn't need. What she did carry was far more dangerous: a folder of legal warrants and a body cam feeding live footage to federal investigators. Inside the suite, Eden returned to her stillness, her performance refined after 15 days of practice. Every breath was measured. Every flicker of her eyelids was controlled. Her heart pounded beneath the blanket, but on the outside, she was comatose perfection. When Marcus re-entered the room to check vitals, their eyes met just for a second, enough for him to nod, once subtly a signal that everything was in place. You ready? He whispered as he adjusted her blanket. Her fingers twitched beneath the sheets. That was all the answer he needed. At 10:30, the suite door opened with theatrical certainty. Vanessa walked in first, her expression calm but victorious. Lucas followed, flipping through the transfer paperwork on his tablet. Behind them, Dr. Hamilton entered, eyes down, hands already sweating. 2 paramedics trailed behind with a stretcher. She'll be out of here in an hour, Vanessa said to Lucas, her voice light, almost casual. And then we can finally take over the company and clean house. Enough of this charity nonsense. Lucas grinned. It's about time Carter Learning stopped playing savior and started printing real money. Marcus's jaw clenched, but he kept his expression blank as he noted Eden's vitals on the monitor. He felt sick listening to them talk about her around her, as though she were just a body in a bed. Excuse me, Catherine said politely, stepping into the room. I'm here to assist with the transfer, but before we proceed, there are a few additional forms to complete. Vanessa blinked. Forms? What forms? Catherine smiled, but it wasn't a nurse's smile. It was something sharper, colder, legal, criminal ones, she said, pulling off her badge lanyard to reveal the emblem of the Department of Justice. Vanessa Carter, Lucas Monroe, Dr. Hamilton, you're all under investigation for attempted murder document forgery and conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. The room exploded into chaos. Vanessa's face went ghost white. Lucas dropped his tablet. Dr. Hamilton tried to slip out the door, but ran directly into David, who blocked his path with a deadpan expression and a set of handcuffs. But none of them noticed the most powerful moment yet. Eden opened her eyes. Slowly, with grace and fire, she sat up in bed. Her hospital gown hung loose on her shoulders, but her posture was unshakable. The shock on Vanessa's face was almost poetic. "I'm not brain dead," Eden said, her voice calm and razor-sharp. "I've been listening to every word, every lie, every plan to erase me." Vanessa staggered back, mouth agape. "You're not, no, this isn't possible." "Oh," Eden murmured. "But it is." And as Catherine began reading them their rights, Eden looked toward Marcus, still standing by her side, steady as ever. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield had just shifted. For the first time in weeks, Eden wasn't just surviving, she was winning. Vanessa tried to speak, but her voice cracked before a single word could form. Lucas looked from Eden to the federal agents, like a man waking up inside his own nightmare. Dr. Hamilton, handcuffed and trembling, sank into the nearest chair, his career dissolving before his eyes. Eden's voice was quiet, but every syllable struck like a hammer. "You talked about me like I was an object, an obstacle. You planned to keep me sedated, sell off everything I built, and celebrate while I disappeared in some private clinic. Did you really think I wouldn't protect myself?" Vanessa's composure finally snapped. "I was trying to save the company. You were pushing it into the ground with all your charity work, charity?" Eden repeated, almost laughing. "You mean the free learning programs that reached over 3 million kids this year, or the technology that put educational tools into hands that never had access before? That's not charity, Vanessa. That's purpose." Lucas stepped forward, reaching out as if she might still believe him. "Eden, this isn't what you think. I have recordings," she said flatly, "of everything, including your charming little conversation about how accidents happen in ambulances." She nodded toward David, who held up a tablet and hit play. The room filled with Vanessa's voice. "Sometimes I think it would just be easier if she didn't survive the transfer." Lucas's voice followed seconds later, low and calculating. "We've talked about this. It's safer legally for now." The agents didn't hesitate. They moved in like clockwork, cuffing Vanessa and Lucas, reading them their rights as they stammered denials that no one believed. But Eden wasn't looking at them anymore. She was looking at Marcus, who stood by her bed with a stillness that steadied her more than any words could have. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, touching her arm with a care that hadn't changed since she was pretending to sleep. "I will be," she replied, and for the first time in weeks she meant it. Vanessa's voice rose behind her, desperate now. "Eden, please. We're family. You can't do this." Eden turned slowly. Her eyes held no trace of mercy. "Family doesn't try to erase you from your own life." Lucas made one final, pitiful attempt to save himself. "You can't prove we sabotaged the plane?" Eden smiled coldly. "Actually, I can. The technician you bribed already confessed. And remember that night you asked about the plane's maintenance systems over dinner? That entire conversation was recorded." Lucas's face collapsed in horror. As the agents led them away, Eden felt something in her chest loosen, like a knot finally unraveling. The fear that had lived in her lungs for weeks began to dissolve, replaced by something fiercer. Clarity. Control. David handed her the tablet and gave her a nod of admiration. "You really built a flawless trap." "I had help," she said, glancing at Marcus. Catherine, standing nearby with a smirk on her face, added, "I think your ex just set a new record for shortest time between planning a murder and getting arrested for it." Eden couldn't help but laugh, just once, sharp and genuine. Then she turned back to Marcus. He was watching her with something deep in his eyes, not awe, not shock, just steady, unwavering presence. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You believed in me when I was nothing more than a body in a bed." He took her hand, not as a nurse, not as an employee, but as something more. "You were never just a body in a bed." And right there in the space between justice and freedom, Eden Carter realized something she hadn't planned for. In protecting her life's work, she might have found the one person who could see through the fortress she'd built around her heart and choose to stay anyway. The room had mostly emptied. Agents were gone. Catherine and David were quietly tying up legal loose ends outside, and the paramedics who had come to transport Eden were long dismissed. For the first time in what felt like forever, the suite was still, quiet, safe. Eden sat upright now, wrapped in a soft hospital robe, the thin morning light sliding through the blinds and warming her face. Across from her, Marcus stood with his arms crossed, unsure if he was allowed to sit to speak or even to breathe too deeply. The adrenaline from the past hour hadn't worn off yet, but what lingered between them wasn't tension. It was something deeper, something neither of them quite knew how to name. She turned toward him and held out her hand, palm up. "Come here." He hesitated only a second before crossing the room and taking her hand. His skin was warm, a little rough, calloused from years of work. She looked at it for a long moment before speaking. "I heard you," she said. His brows pulled together, confused. "What do you mean that night?" she clarified. "When you told me I changed the way you see the world. When you said you'd fallen for the kindness I try to hide." Marcus's throat tightened. He pulled his hand back, instinctively, flustered. Eden, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for you to hear that. You weren't supposed to. It wasn't professional. And you were. Well, I thought you were." "I know," she interrupted gently, "and that's what makes it the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me." He looked up at her, then truly looked at her. "Why are you telling me this now?" Because she said, standing, slowly, still a bit unsteady, but stronger than anyone would expect from someone who'd faked unconsciousness for 2 weeks, "You loved me when you thought I had nothing left to give. No voice, no power, not even a future." Marcus stepped closer but said nothing. His eyes were wide, searching. "I've spent years building walls," she continued, her voice soft but certain, "to protect myself, to survive in boardrooms full of men who thought I was just a lucky girl with a trust fund. But you saw me before I ever gave you a reason to." She took a breath, steadied herself, then reached into the nightstand drawer. From it, she pulled out a small velvet box, simple, unmarked. Not the kind of thing most billionaires kept hidden away. Marcus blinked, stunned. "You said once the heart doesn't see color or money or power. It just sees kindness." She opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, not flashy but elegant and intentional. "So I want to ask you something." Marcus's mouth opened, then closed again. He looked like a man watching the ground shift beneath him. "Marcus Bell," she said, her voice trembling just slightly for the first time that morning, "will you marry me?" He stared at her for a moment as though trying to absorb whether this was real or part of the surreal whirlwind they'd just endured. "Are you serious?" he asked, voice low and breaking. "Completely," she whispered, "because I know who I am. And I know who you are. And I'd rather build a future with someone who once loved me at my most powerless than spend another minute with someone who only loved what I could give them." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, took her face in his hands and kissed her, slow, certain, breathless. When he finally pulled back, his smile was wide and disbelieving. "Yes," he said. 1,000 times, yes." Outside the glass doors, Catherine caught the end of it and rolled her eyes playfully. Well, that's definitely not how Vanessa thought this day would end. Eden laughed, really laughed, and leaned into Marcus's shoulder. "No," she said, still smiling, "but I'd say it's the perfect ending to the wrong story, and the beginning of a better one." 6 months later, the woman the world once thought was comatose walked confidently through the gleaming halls of Carter Learning Systems' newly expanded headquarters. Eden wore a sleek navy blazer, her wedding ring catching the sunlight through floor-to-ceiling windows. At her side was Marcus, now officially Dr. Marcus Bell Carter, reviewing a report on the company's latest global initiatives. 400,000 more kids this quarter, he said, glancing at the data on his tablet. Tablets delivered, literacy rates up, and revenues up 42%. Eden smiled, pausing in front of a digital map marked with blinking lights, each representing a new classroom, funded, a new life touched. Who would have guessed, she said softly, that doing good would turn out to be so profitable? They walked past a bronze plaque etched with Marcus's name, the Marcus Bell Center for Medical Ethics. Funded entirely by Eden's foundation, the center was dedicated to protecting vulnerable patients, ensuring no one else would ever be silenced the way she nearly had been. "You know, I still don't believe you named it after me," Marcus said, adjusting the tie she'd picked out for him that morning. "You saved my life," she replied, touching his arm. "You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. That kind of love deserves a legacy." Later that day, they attended the opening of a new school on Chicago's South Side, where children clutched new tablets, their parents wiping tears as they watched the impossible become reality. These were Marcus's people, Eden's too now. The future they were building wasn't made of boardrooms or press releases, it was made of classrooms and second chances. Standing before the crowd, Eden took the mic and looked out over the sea of expectant faces. "A year ago, I almost died trying to do this. Bring quality education to communities the world too often forgets," she began. "People told me I was wasting my money, that I'd never make a difference." She paused, then smiled at Marcus, standing just off stage. "But I can say now, with absolute certainty, that investing in people is never a waste. And almost losing everything helped me find the one thing I didn't know. I needed someone who loves me, not for what I have, but for who I am." After the event, a reporter asked her about Vanessa and Lucas. Eden's response was calm, measured. "They got what they earned," she said. "But more importantly, they taught me something I'll never forget: the difference between people who want to take from you and those who want to build with you." Marcus added quietly, "Rachel tried to destroy Eden's empire, but in the end, she gave her something far more valuable: the truth about who really loves her." That night, in a cozy apartment overlooking the city, deliberately smaller than her old mansion, Eden curled up beside Marcus, her hand resting gently on the swell of her belly. Their first child was due in spring. "You know what's funny?" she said, looking out at the city lights. "Vanessa spent years trying to tear me down, and in the end, she built the platform for everything we're doing now." Marcus kissed her temple. "That's the difference between people driven by greed and people driven by love." Eden nodded, resting her head on his shoulder. "The sweetest revenge isn't prison. It's building something so good, so strong, they could never destroy it even if they tried." She closed her eyes, not with fear this time, but with peace. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you believe in love again, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.